Good evening, everybody. My name is Jessica and I work for the Alumni Office here at King's. I'm delighted to welcome you to our King's Expert Series webinar this evening, which is all about the ethics of artificial intelligence. We have some brilliant academics from King's lined up here this evening who are going to be sharing their research with you from King's Digital Futures Institute and also the Centre for Technology, Ethics, Law and Society. In the second half of this webinar, you'll have your chance to ask your own questions to our panel by using the Q&A function, or if you're watching our YouTube live stream, by commenting just below the video. I'm now going to hand over to Professor Marion Thing, who will be co-chairing this webinar with Professor Stephen Connor. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jessica. Huge warm welcome to all of you. I know there are people joining from across several continents and many countries. So we're really delighted that you are with us tonight and hope this will bring back a little bit of a memory of your time at King's and something interesting about a topic that is very much on all our minds at the moment. As Jessica said, I'm a professor at King's, Professor of Culture and Technology here at King's. I'm also Chair Director of the Digital Futures Institute at King's. And I'll just say a few words about that before I let my colleagues introduce themselves. And the Digital Futures Institute at King's has, I think, three really distinctive features. One is that we are very much trying to get away from the binary debate that seems to be happening a lot at the moment, whether you're either yay technology or nay technology, a tech optimist or a tech pessimist. And we want to have a new kind of conversation that brings those two sides together and has a different type of conversation that recognizes the problems, but also recognizes the opportunities of this new technological sphere we're in. The Digital Futures Institute at King's is also very distinctive because it's very broadly multidisciplinary. It brings people together from across all of the disciplines because every discipline has its interest in and its investment in new technologies, and it has new perspectives to bring. And then thirdly, for the Digital Futures Institute at King's, we are particularly interested in the relationship between the individual and technology. So our slogan is living well with technology. And we're particularly interested in creating a future in which we all as individuals in our own way can live well with technology. And this is very much all a response to that sense that where we're at now with new technologies is not so much that we can't code well enough, but to create new technologies and take the next step forward, but that we haven't yet got the frameworks around that code to enable us to live well necessarily with those new developments. So as Jessica said, I'm hosting this together with my co-host, Stephen Connor. So Steve, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Hello and welcome to you all. I'm Stephen Connor. I'm Director of Research in the Digital Futures Institute here at King's. And as Marion said, I'll be taking it in turns with Marion to ask questions of our panelists. And as we get to the second half of this hour, we will then be funneling your questions that I hope that you will be adding to the Q&A as we speak, funneling your questions to our panelists.
Thanks very much, Steve. And to introduce our panelists, going to introduce themselves. Let me do this in alphabetical order. Kate, why don't you go first?
Hello and good evening. I'm Dr. Kate Delin. I'm a reader in AI and Society in the Department of Digital Humanities at King's. And I'm also a fellow of the Digital Futures Institute this semester. My work explores the impact that AI has. I'm an interdisciplinary computer scientist. I spend a lot of my time working between STEM subjects and arts and humanities subjects. And I'm also part of a UKRI-funded £33 million project on responsible AI, where I'm the lead at King's. And that looks at how we bring together everyone working in the AI space who are worried about the way AI is being developed, and how can we really unite to make sure that things are being done responsibly, that there is accountability, and that we're getting a wide range of views as well.
Thanks very much, Kate. Matea, why don't you go next?
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Matea Đurović, and I'm Professor of Law and Technology and also Director of Centre for Digital Law at King's College London. Very kind of happy to see so many attendees this evening. I'm like, my kind of research focuses on the legal aspects of the new technologies, and in particular, how kind of the legal framework for artificial intelligence and other types of new technologies is and also should be. I think now it's very kind of interesting times, you know, to kind of impose and put some limits, and that's why kind of legal aspects are always so important. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Matea. And Sanjay, if we can go to you now.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Dr. Sanj Modgill. I'm a reader in artificial intelligence at the Department of Informatics here at King's College, and a visiting professor at the Department of Philosophy in Milan. And my sort of teaching and research interests are on the philosophy and ethics of AI. So what insights can we take from philosophy when we think about ethical issues in artificial intelligence? And another main strand of my research is developing models of dialogue and communication so that humans and AI can reason together, so that the machines of the future don't make decisions that are misaligned with human values.
Fantastic. So this is the rather wonderful panel that we're able to bring you tonight. I think we're in for a really fun hour. I wonder if I can start the questions. As Steve and Jessica said, we're going to go over to audience questions about halfway through the session, by about 6:30. But if I can start with a question that recognizes that we hear so much about AI these days. There's a lot of talk about AI all around us in the newspapers, on the media, about all kinds of things. But as experts, I wonder if you can tell us, what are we not talking about that we really should be talking about in relation to our future with AI? What are the things that you're not seeing in that general debate that you really want our audience to think about and to take away from this session as something new that perhaps they really haven't considered before? You can dive in. I don't mind who goes first. I'd like an answer from each of you actually on this one.
Okay, I'll start with that. So artificial intelligence doesn't really have a standardized and agreed definition, but in general, it's the concept of machines being able to carry out tasks in an intelligent manner. And the degree and definition of that intelligence is really up for discussion, as is the autonomy of the machines. But it exists today in very narrow and specific contexts. And we think about it today with things like ChatGPT, large language models. That's a form of machine learning. So the computer learns from the data we feed it, analyzes patterns, it looks for connections. The secret there, the thing that people don't really know, is just how much human labor goes into that. So behind the scenes, there tend to be people working to label that data or to moderate that content. There's a supply chain for the hardware as well as the software. So there are people involved the whole way along. So I think what people aren't talking about is just how artificial intelligence is not always artificial.
Great place to start. Not as artificial as we think it is sometimes. Sanjay, Matea, who wants to go next?
Yeah, maybe just a good follow-up. I mean, that also, I mean, what Kate has said is actually a very good starting point, because actually that's partially from a legal perspective what causes different problems, because, you know, artificial intelligence, especially, for example, in the context, if it is applied, let's say, in judicial sector, in justice, you know, the problem with discrimination and bias is exactly because there are kind of humans behind them. So that kind of causes one of the major kind of regulatory issues from a legal perspective, how to properly regulate it. And we could see this, you know, when we talk about application of kind of artificial intelligence as judges in different cases, exactly because there are kind of humans behind who are actually feeding this artificial intelligence. And this is why, you know, again, kind of legal framework is very, very important to kind of regulate this and to say what kind of artificial intelligence shall be permitted and which one kind of shall be kind of assessed whether it should be permitted, and what kind of artificial intelligence should not be permitted under any conditions.
Thanks, Matea. Sanjay.
Yeah, you actually mentioned this earlier, Marion, about this dichotomy between sort of techno-optimists and techno-pessimists. And I think a lot of the news, and in a lot of the news recently, you hear about these warnings of existential threats, new existential threats that will arrive as a result of more and more sophisticated artificial intelligence. And then you have others that say, no, we've nothing to worry about. But I think what's perhaps not appreciated is the extent to which AI can amplify existing existential threats. So take, for example, climate change, or supposing we have a much more virulent pandemic, to come to a consensus on solutions to these threats requires a shared understanding of the facts. And we're already witnessing kind of polarization and a lack of shared understanding about the facts through social media. And this is going to be arguably made far worse by the use of AI to generate more and more misinformation and deep fakes. And as these large language models like ChatGPT become more sophisticated, they may actually start to manipulate us and be used by bad actors to manipulate us into our kind of silos, so that we become more polarized and have undermine our capacities to come to a shared understanding about the facts on the ground, and thereby how to solve these existential problems.
Right. Yeah. So when we think about the sort of the tech pessimist future is often about weaponized robots, but you're saying actually it could be more of an information war rather than actual armed intelligent machines. Yeah. Great place to start. Steve, do you want
Yes,
to...
I think we've got into the area that Marion announced is really our mission in the Digital Futures Institute, which is to think about the ways in which we might not just put up with digital technology, with AI, or avoid it or survive it, but actually flourish with it, actually live well. So can I ask our panelists, what would be your sense of what it would mean to live well with AI?
Well, maybe I can follow, perhaps following on from what I was talking about earlier. So in the case of, for example, let's say of large language models, developing more sophisticated conversational abilities, and therefore the ability to manipulate others, to, as it were, lure in people into perhaps rather unhealthy relationships in which they become socially isolated. With this prospect in mind, I really do think that living well partly requires that these AI systems of the present and future, as it were, wear their lack of a heart on their sleeve, so that they make it so that companies that make these kind of applications, we should regulate the development of these applications so that there is absolutely no room for a misunderstanding by users that they are in fact interacting with a machine, with an AI, and not with a person. We want to avoid counterfeit people in the form of AI machines. So I think, I personally think that's one of the, you can think of it as some kind of watermarking, as you do with counterfeit banknotes, right? That we need some visible way in which, clear way that to communicate to users that they are interacting with an AI and not with another person.
Yeah, if I may follow up, I mean, because Sanjay actually mentioned two very important things with which I would fully agree. One is kind of proper regulation, adequate regulation, which on the one side, it's something that, it's always emphasized that, kind of AI must be properly regulated, and that, some subtypes of AI should be allowed, some should not be. But also on the other side, what we must not forget, that we live in the kind of digital era, and it's very important to have proper framework, which is also going to facilitate and enable development of new technologies and AI in practice. It's very, very, very important for the economic growth. And generally speaking, also on a micro level, that companies should kind of try to use them if this is allowed, because that's part of the kind of them winning in the competitive race. And also what Sanjay has mentioned, I mean, that's one of the fundamentally important aspects, executive regulation of the AI, which is this kind of transparency. So these kind of things, that, for example, in this context, that consumers are aware that they are kind of having, let's say, kind of a chat with a machine and not with a human behind. For example, if you go to kind of customer service, because as I did some days ago, you complained with kind of Scottish Power regarding your energy bill, so that you actually know behind is not a human being, but kind of a machine, and that you always have an opportunity also to talk to a human. I think that's also very, very important from a regulatory also perspective. Thank you.
I would echo that about transparency. I think that's something that is really valuable. And I'm not actually, I find it really interesting. And a lot of my research focuses on how we build relationships with this new technology, including the kind of close and intimate friendships and companionships with things like social robots and AI. But at the same time, deception shouldn't be part of that. So I agree with Sanjay that we have to be very careful about how people are given information and who takes their data and what is done with it. So I would say, yes, transparency is something that contributes to living well with technology for sure, and just keeping the human as the main focus the whole time.
Would it be better, this is just a follow-up, would it be better if we trusted AI or if we remained mistrustful of it?
I mean, that's such a good question. And I think first you've got to go down, what do we mean by trust? Because we can trust that something is safe and that it's been verified, but we may not perceive it to be trustworthy. So I think there's lots of different layers there as well. I think we should have a degree of skepticism. Yes, it's quite useful in this day and age to cultivate that. I mean, that's one of the really interesting things about something like Digital Futures Institute, where arts and humanities have a lot of critical skills that we have built down the years, where we interrogate exactly this kind of thing. So it also involves an interdisciplinary approach. It's not enough to just solely have a tech focus on this. It has to have tech, it has to have philosophy, law, humanities, arts. We need this multiple and varied perspective.
Yeah, just to follow up on this, I think it's actually trust is definitely essential. And, again, from a legal regulatory perspective, how do you kind of get how do you reach, how to kind of develop, how do you maintain this trust in the new technologies? Well, if you know that, there is a proper legal regulatory framework that, will protect you, that kind of AI, which is being used in practice, is actually the only one which is allowed. And it is allowed because it has gone through all these kind of complicated processes for its assessment and thus complies with all of the applicable rules. And that's exactly, these days we talk a lot about, European Union being at the forefront, being the first kind of region in the world to kind of regulate AI. And exactly that's kind of, I would say, the main justification behind all this kind of development in the European Union is to kind of build trust in the new technologies, not kind of to prohibit the technological development. On the contrary, to kind of build trust in the usage of the new technology. And how we do it actually by kind of securing that, the AI that is being deployed is actually safe, all of this and the other stuff, complies with all the requirements, and thus people can trust it.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Sanjay,
yeah. No, I mean, actually following up on what Kate was saying, I think trust has to be earned. And to earn trust, we need to, in my view, see a bit of a shift away from the dominance of these regulatory bodies and panels that are convened, that are dominated by technologists, AI researchers, businesses, commercial interests, politicians. We need, I mean, if you remember, of course, at the beginning of the pandemic in the UK, we had a sort of sage body of experts who were kind of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. We need the same to inform regulation going forward so that we ensure that AI works for the benefit of humanity and not to its detriment. And so we're going to need psychologists, sociologists, philosophers to advise and think about the impact that AI will have on humanity and, in fact, on the way in which humans relate to other humans. I mean, I know Kate mentions and has done quite a bit of work on this issue of the extent to which AI will impact human relations with other humans.
Yeah.
So we really do need, I think, this interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approach to regulation. And I'm not really seeing as much of that as I would like.
I would agree. I've just recently joined a commission called the AI Faith and Civil Society Commission, which is made up of voices from different religions, different faiths and no faiths, and campaign groups, things like that. And it's all about how do we get our values across, the values of people who are either maybe using this AI or maybe they don't use it, but they're impacted by it. And it's quite interesting how different religions are approaching this as well, and different groups. And to have it's the common thread that kind of runs through all those things is that we want to make sure that people benefit and live well. And so this is something that is being said worldwide from many different perspectives. No matter what your belief system, people are saying, what can this technology do for us to improve the way that we live and to make sure we're not harming anything or anyone?
Maybe just picking up on that last thought, Kate, what are the most exciting potentials at the moment from AI? I mean, we talk a lot about the threats, we talk a lot about the challenges of AI, but if you were each to tell us where you think the most exciting potential is going to come from this technology, that would be great. And just while you're having a minute to think about that, let me just say there are some absolutely fantastic questions coming in from the audience. Please do, all of you, keep sending in your questions. We're going to turn to your questions shortly. So keep them coming. Kate.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, healthcare is the really obvious one that springs to mind because we know that there are advances being made there. It's not, I don't think we're going to be replacing clinicians or anytime soon, or radiologists or anything like that. We need that human expertise, but to be able to speed up processes is really, really useful. And for me, I think seeing the potential in agriculture, so we can use AI to analyze satellite imagery to find out when is the best time to plant crops or to harvest, or what land is good and what isn't. I think that's a really nice example of it runs in the background and people don't really consider the benefits that can bring, but I think that's a very useful one.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about it, it's incredible how kind of horizontal this, how many kind of areas of daily life AI is affecting, and how many actually kind of positive developments there are, like medicine. Of course, I think probably health is always the most important thing. But as a kind of a lawyer, from a legal perspective, it's also incredible in the context of, judicial profession. Let's say, one of the most problematic issues in the legal world and generally in society is access to justice. So definitely kind of AI can help with that and can speed up the processes and can kind of secure that, justice is being achieved for everyone. So in that sense, I think the potential for kind of AI in the legal sector, especially kind of this access to justice and protection of those who are in need and who otherwise, without the AI may have difficulties in achieving and accessing justice, is immense.
Sorry, Sanjay.
Oh no, I was going to sort of just follow up actually again with Kate and look to the healthcare sector, and in particular, I think I think we're witnessing a demographic crisis worldwide with less and less people being born and populations getting older and older, and that was going to make the current social care crisis even more extreme in terms of a lack of the lack of care for the elderly, and I could envisage robots being used to assist and support in social care settings. Of course, every beneficial sort of every coin has two sides. If you have the benefits on the one side and concerns on the other. I mean, I think that again, coming back to an earlier point, for example, the use of humanoid-like social robots. Even in what seemingly benign settings like social care has some potential. There are some potential pitfalls there, but I think that could potentially really help address the social care crisis that will unfortunately only get worse as we see dwindling birth rates around the world.
My professional life as an academic has been more or less continuous with digital technology. I wrote my PhD with a biro and a typewriter, but then every book that I've written since then has been written with a word processor or computer. So let's talk a bit about work and how work might be changed by AI. Do you think that if we have jobs, our jobs will be more interesting or less interesting as a result of AI?
I think they're going to be different. I would not say even like kind of more like depends, some things they're definitely going to be different. And they say, that legal profession and lawyers is certainly one of kind of, they say 10 most affected professions by the development of the AI. So definitely, it will be changing. And, they always say, oh my God, like AI is going to replace lawyers. So, kind of different types of new technologies are going to replace lawyers. I fully disagree with that. I always, kind of follow this sentence, which says basically, AI is not going to replace lawyers who know how to rely and to use AI. So there is always, especially kind of in the kind of legal world, there is always a need for human. of course, kind of the type of the job is being changed. So, for example, in the past, I mean, I remember myself, being a young trainee in a law firm, you would always have to do, manually all this kind of due diligence to go through the documents. Now you can use different types of programs to help you with this. So, I mean, but on the other side, you still need to verify it. Or if you're kind of, that's a big thing, as we are kind of, that's something common for all of us here, that we are all in academia. So this big thing, big discussion, I think I don't want to talk much from the KCL perspective, but, at King's, we've been kind of really involved in this question. Oh my God, students can use chat for their exams. What should we do? What should be kind of the response of academic institutions? So definitely, and that, are we kind of, I even, yesterday, actually, a friend asked me, oh, does this mean, because there is now AI, does it mean that we don't need any more kind of professors? Are you going to lose your job? But he was really serious about that.
Yeah, and if I may, on again, in answer to this question, so the student the other day asked me, well, why should I do a degree in computer science and learn how to program when these AI machines are already beginning to do very sophisticated programming, and they'll get even more sophisticated in their programming abilities? And my answer was, well, to be able to check that the program does what it does and does so safely and does so properly, you need to understand how to program in the first place. So verification and checking of the outputs of these AI systems will require that you understand how to create the outputs in the first place. And then, as Matthias suggested, it will maybe create opportunities for perhaps doing more creative work, more design type work, perhaps the kind of work that involves less drudgery and kind of menial or manual type skills, but allows us to explore and use our imaginative and creative abilities. So that would be a kind of optimistic vision of AI in the workplace.
I think the creative sector would love to hear that, because it seems as if it's so under threat at the minute. But I think I agree with you. There's hope there. We've been here before. We were here with the first industrial revolution. It's just it was going for different jobs then. The textile mills were replacing skilled craftspeople with weaving and knitting and things like that. And we already had a pushback there from the Luddites, who were very worried about the loss of skill. And we're actually seeing bits of that kind of re-emerge today, which is a really interesting time to look at those social changes. But what happens tends to be that, of course, this time around, the scale is much greater, the speed is much greater. But what tends to happen is the next generation, where things will settle again. So yes, there are going to be job losses, and it's not everyone is going to immediately reskill and retrain, but it should settle, hopefully. And of course, there will be new jobs that don't even exist yet, because that's what happens when a new piece of technology comes along. So yes, we have to think very carefully about what's going to happen, because it's definitely going to have an impact, and we have to look at how the economy is going to be able to deal with that. And I'm not an economist, so I'm not even going to try and work out what that's going to look like. We have to be aware of it, and perhaps we'll see, if we have crafts and those crafts are able to be done mass produced, like the textile industry in the early 19th century, what value does our craft have? And we may see an interest in handmade things, in human-made things, in the same way that people favor microbreweries or handmade carpentry. So we can see that the craft of art and writing, of drawing and designing, that may actually be a good thing because it is valued more, although the downside of that is that there is less access for people. It becomes a much, we may lose marginalized people there, because it focuses on those who can afford to train and do that. It's exciting times, it's scary times, but it's really, really interesting.
And I'm always reminded at this point of those visions of the 1960s, where they had us all with limitless leisure time, because never mind the last industrial revolution, even the second half of the 20th century was supposed to develop, all of these gadgets that would be labor saving, that would boost productivity. And the big problem they were contemplating in the 60s was how to fill all of that leisure time we would have. I'm not sure how many of us feel as if as if our main problem in life is too much leisure time. I'm not sure how quite how much that vision has come to fruition. And I always think of that when we talk now about, you know, oh, what work will there be to do? Will we have any work to do? And I think I'm going to segue as neatly from this into the audience questions. Thanks so much for these brilliant questions that have come in. And I love the fact that, in fact, we've just answered, I think, one of the first questions that came in, which was, are we not making ourselves obsolete in the future with AI? And I think you've all given a very resounding no to that. Maybe equivalent to the sense that we're not all just sitting with our feet up now, in spite of the visions of the 60s of, you know, all of these productivity boosting, labor saving technologies. But I wonder if I can go into the second half of that question. And thank you very much, whoever posted this question. This is a really interesting one, I think. What new ethical or philosophical questions do the rapid developments in generative AI bring about? So do you want to each give a little pitch on, are there new, never mind how AI interacts with the existing things that we care about or worry about, you know, what new ethical or philosophical questions might these rapid developments in generative AI particularly bring up for us?
Well, if I may, I think one interesting question is, as we witness the use of AI, as we start to interact with, as it were, counterfeit people, these large language models, as we start to tune in more and more into virtual online environments generated by AI, and it's no coincidence that Facebook renamed themselves Meta in anticipation of the metaverse and the AI generated metaverse. I think an interesting question then arises. A philosophical question is why do we intrinsically value the real as opposed to the virtual? At the moment, it's there was a philosophical thought experiment called the experience machine, where it's a bit like the Matrix. You could sort of plug in and just experience virtual bliss in a virtual world. And apparently, anecdotally, over time, students typically say in the past would say we wouldn't want to plug in. But the number of students willing to plug in is going up when these kinds of questions are asked. So, and that's partly because the people are getting more and more used to sort of living online with virtual dating and et cetera, in the social media platforms. So I think an interesting question is, why do we sort of give it intrinsic value to the real, like the human generated art, as opposed to art generated by AI? And should we give intrinsic value to the real over the non-real, the artificial, the virtual? So I think that's a fascinating philosophical question.
That's such a good question. And yeah, I think that's, what is it about the reality? And it's a question I ask about relationships when people, there are people, hundreds of thousands, millions of people forming relationships with AI chatbots. And I don't inherently see it as a bad thing. They are not being deceived about it. They're entering this willingly. They're forming new bonds and friendships. And from that, they're forming friendships with each other as co-users of different platforms. There are ethical issues around that with, who's got that data? What's the big tech company doing? Why are they commodifying emotion? Because sometimes they'll make you pay for upgrades to your virtual companion. And I think, but that's what really interests me, what Sanjay's just said there. Who decides that a human-human relationship gets to be the best relationship? Because they can be horrible and messy and terrible. And sometimes it's quite nice to have a sounding board that will be completely unjudgmental. So what is it philosophically that makes us so sure that the gold standard is human-human? And as it happens, a lot of people who, like I say, have formed these relationships tend to form human social relationships around them. So that doesn't really concern me. But we're seeing this emergence of a new social category of AIs and companion robots that behave as if they're human, even though they will never understand or reason. And that is so exciting from a research point of view, because we choose to interact socially because we're social creatures. So I think there's a whole wonderful field of study there.
Yeah, just a follow up to Kate. I mean, it was a good example, but there are also some issues. I mean, like in Belgium, the guy who committed suicide after having a chat with AI chat boss, this kind of I mean, also it was very kind of important, the question how to properly regulate it. And, you know, I mean, it's also very interesting because, you know, Gen AI, it's all kind of form of new technology. So we are kind of still, I mean, again, I'm talking, you know, testing what actually the risks are. I mean, you have an excellent example from another type of new technology from the past, like, you know, these e-scooters, electric scooters that were kind of seen 10 years ago as something so amazing, ecological, sustainable, wonderful. And then, you know, all this, you know, kind of incidents started, you know, people were injured, people were even killed by other, you know, driving e-scooters. You know, it turns out they are kind of not that environmentally friendly as it was initially thought. So that's, I think, also kind of with Gen AI, it's kind of still a new thing. And, you know, besides, you know, this kind of ethical and philosophical, we already have not only kind of abstract legal questions, what will happen, but we already have proper legal cases. And one of the best, of course, comes, you know, in the US, because things always develop there the fastest, which is this kind of big case from some months ago where kind of the Times has sued OpenAI over kind of artificial intelligence use of copyrighted work, because, you know, millions of articles from the New York Times were used to train chat bots that now compete with it as kind of it is claimed in that lawsuit. And this is kind of big thing, because I can tell you from kind of legal perspective now, I mean, so many lawyers are being contacted that kind of rely on Gen AI, how to use it and whether they cannot all use it, because there is always this question of compliance and whether or not they can be sued. So in the sense, again, just to kind of to sum up what would be my answer, we are still kind of checking what kind of the question side. But again, I mean, when we talk about new technologies, again, I want to kind of say amazing position of Kings, because just next door to us, I mean, 5 minutes from Covent Garden, there is a transport museum. And you can go there. It's really wonderful, because you can actually see what was the reaction to the development of different types of new technologies, you know, like the tube, trams, you know, buses, how there was always a lot of this discussion and a lot of, you know, development also of the regulatory framework, because at the time when these things started being used, it could have not been envisaged at all what are the risks that are bringing. And that's something to be kind of seen in the future. But again, as I mentioned, the example of New York Times, we already do have some real cases where kind of, you know, Gen AI, and it's very interesting to see. That's the case that's for sure going to be decided by the US Supreme Court, where kind of we'll see what are the effects in practice. Thank you.
And the past often tells us that we worry about the wrong things. Not that there aren't things to worry about, but that we often don't get the right things to worry about, which is a super interesting dimension that you're opening up there, Matteo.
Yes, I always have much more trust in having people around who know how to fix things that have gone wrong, rather than having trust in the people who claim to design them perfectly in the first place. But I'd like, if I may, to try to plait together two very interesting questions that are about closely related things. So one questioner asks, how do specialists, for example, doctors, ensure they have a voice at the table when AI is being developed in their fields, when they may not understand or know how to validate the technical aspects of the AI models at work? And then rather similarly, another question, how do we moderate the enthusiasm by non-experts who are driving implementation of AI? I am concerned, says our questioner, by clinicians who seem to be turned on by go faster stripes and what AI radiology decision support systems, in my case, says our questioner, in stroke, where evidence of safety and efficacy is scant. So this is the question about involvement of existing areas of expertise in AI development.
If I may, I can give a concrete example to the first question about how do specialists have a voice at the table. This project I'm on, Responsible AI UK, we have different working groups, and one of those is AI health and social care, and that's led by a King's professor, Prakash Dasgupta, who is a surgeon, and he does robotic surgery, and they have in the past couple of weeks managed to come up with a plan and some funding where they're going to try and put an AI champion into every trust in the UK, so that we can get proper kind of feedback and dialogue going between the people who are creating the technology and the people who are likely to be using it. So again, I think this is where transparency comes in, but also the interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary work, because there has to be a conversation going on. There has to be, and I'm quite sure Matteo is going to come in and say regulation is also key, because I think it is. There has to be this verification and this trust, all of those things that we've talked about. But it can't just be, so it shouldn't just, we need the specialists with their domain expert, but we also need the other people involved in that conversation.
Matteo, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, I would fully agree with Kate what she has said. But in this context, I'm thinking in other ways, Steve, in line with your question. I'm just thinking how us, for example, lawyers, are now really, many of us went into studying law because we wanted to kind of run away from maths, engineering, these kind of things. But now we actually need to really get involved. And if you want to kind of to regulate properly new technology and AI, you need to properly understand it. And I think that's kind of quite a big problem. And, as we talk a lot about this Artificial Intelligence Act on the European Union level, kind of to properly understand what AI, and we started this, that was also one of the big things, to properly define AI, what it is, and also what the risk it is bringing. And I think that's kind of big challenge for the lawyers, that, they're the ones who regulate it. They're the ones, who kind of, file suits on the ground, for kind of, let's say, for improper usage of the AI, of new technologies, but they do not properly understand it. And that's kind of the thing. The remedy to that, that's something that, for example, we do have already at law school at King's, but, many law schools are following in that aspect, is, introduction of even sometimes compulsory, but for sure kind of optional modules that deal with kind of coding, AI, machine learning. And that's I can tell you, like from personal experience, all these modules year by year are becoming increasingly popular among the student population.
Yeah, we've heard mention of previous technological revolutions. You ain't seen nothing yet. The AI revolution is going to dwarf the impact of previous technological revolutions. Now, and this partly comes to the point, well, how do we involve specialists? Because, we are technologizing intelligence itself. And this is going to have such a dramatic impact on what it is to be human and on human society, that I would suggest that core AI skills, learning about their capacities, their abilities, should form part of every human's education, right? Starting from a fairly young age. AI should be a core subject, and that should be, in my view, taught at schools and in every university course. Every course will have, because AI is going to impact on every single aspect of our lives in every single sector. And so I think education about the abilities, the opportunities and the threats, and to some extent how AI functions and works and what it can and can't do, should form part of the educational curriculum.
Fantastic. I think I'm going to follow Steve's lead in terms of yoking two questions together. We've got so many absolutely fantastic questions here. I'm going to combine two for this next round of answers, and they're both about marginalized or left behind communities, because we haven't talked about that yet. So I think it'd be nice to have a little bit of discussion on this. So one question is about how can businesses adapt to ensure the inclusivity of AI technologies for older individuals who may not have the same level of technological proficiency as younger demographics? Is there the potential for those individuals to become marginalized? And then the other question is about AI's reliance on vast data collection, particularly for crucial areas like health and emergency interventions. How can we ensure that marginalized and vulnerable communities, often lacking sufficient data collection, are not left behind? So I think we've got a really nice group of issues there, say, around the marginalized and the left behind. We're talking about this as an incredibly rapid area of development. What are we going to do to ensure it's equitable as well as just?
I would say that it goes even wider than that. So yeah, there definitely is a risk of marginalization, but that marginalization on a global scale is huge. AI is very technocratic. It's steered by Silicon Valley. There are also China, but we don't really know what's going on so much. It's more of a closed book. With Silicon Valley, there's a lot of data being gathered from around the world, but it's not being distributed equally at all. The global south is being massively left out of the development of this technology, and are being impacted by it, but aren't getting much in return. So I think that marginalization is, when you consider the things that we've already talked about, that Matthias and Sanjay have mentioned about things like bias, the risk of marginalization is really high. And how is that going to be? How do we push back on that? I mean, I have some idea. I have some ideas, and that includes activism by customers, by employees. We've seen things like at Google where employees staged a walkout because they didn't want to work on a defense contract, Project Maven, and Google backed down and refused to renew their contract. And so people will stand up for the values they believe, and we are starting to see activism and campaign groups call out things like bias, fight back against things like the problem with racist facial recognition technology. So I'm sort of hopeful that there can be social action on that, but there may be other ways to tackle it as well by legal means.
Yeah, that to follow up to Kate, and very good points. I mean, that this facial, I'm all the time thinking about, now there is this huge kind of race to kind of make people pay tickets on the London Tube, and they're introducing more and more this kind of AI and facial recognition, but they're all the time claiming, that this data is not being used against consumers and against individuals. So it's very, very interesting. But I mean, Marion, these two questions that you asked, that are like from the perspective of law and regulation, they're the kind of the most probably difficult ones, because this digital vulnerability in the kind of this new digital world is probably, I mean, the most difficult question, how to regulate. In other words, how to kind of secure that those, vulnerable categories are properly being protected. And the problem is the vulnerability itself as a concept is not homogeneous. It's very, very heterogeneous, because you have different categories. For example, on the one side, let's say on the ground of age, I mean, the younger generation, they are much more skilled with this new technology because they're simply born and they immediately use it. But on the other side, they are more kind of, vulnerable in the context, for, let's say, kind of to do different online shopping, or, even for pornography and these kind of things. So it's very, very kind of problematic how to address these issues. Whereas on the other side, you have an entire population of people who are perfectly healthy, also, kind of, fine, but, simply they come from a different analogous age when kind of they're not used for this kind of new technologies. And for example, I see here in the group, we have a lot of Greeks. And for example, my mother-in-law is Greek, and, she needs to use an application on her phone for whatever kind of, transaction she wants to do with her bank. And she really struggles, and she's not even adult, she's very educated in these kind of things. But, it's just a problem how kind of to properly regulate. And, on the other side, this data protection is really, again, a major thing. And that's something, data is seen as a new gold, new oil. And that's a big, big problem, because, again, although this data has been kind of in a major issue, not like AI only in the last couple of years, but in the last 20 years, when you talk about the data, so much is being collected, so much is being kind of, stored somewhere. And they say that only like 20% of this data is being used, whereas we do not know how it can be used actually against us and our interest in the future. So, I mean, the law is kind of trying to target that. And one of the major issues, one of kind of regulatory attempts is definitely, for example, targeted advertising, how to properly regulate it, that you get an ad. But these are all very, very big challenges. And they get, of course, and Kate has mentioned this, very political dimension, because the issue is that, the companies that deal the most with our data, I mean, that are kind of, are not based in Europe continentally, but they are based on different continents. And that causes different problems, because how to kind of properly regulate and opens a number of political questions. But this is a discussion for a seminar itself.
Yeah, I mean, the issue of making sure that, for example, those the global south aren't left behind is really an issue we're already addressing in terms of how to address the rising gap in inequality between those that have and those that have not. And I am concerned that the AI, the use of AI to further generate wealth will generate wealth selectively amongst those that already have and leave behind the have not. So I don't really have any answers other than what Kate's already suggested, which is activism, but also perhaps existing activist groups or charitable organizations that address these issues start to bring AI into the discussions when they are campaigning and lobbying, so that this is, so maybe it's again making sure that there is proper information and that they're properly informed so that they can bring these kinds of AI-related issues to the table when they are lobbying and campaigning. Another concern is the extent to which the use of processing of large data, volumes of data, the effect that that's having on the environment. I mean, that's potentially dramatically increasing the rate of the rate at which there is global warming. So again, I think that's coming back to the first question. That's often a question, an issue that's hasn't received perhaps as much visibility or had as much discussion as it should do within the public. So hopefully, similar with panels like this, we can get people to be, make sure people are educated and informed about these kinds of issues that probably haven't had that much daylight.
Well, I think we have just 5 or 6 minutes for our last question. Unfortunately, you've got a couple of minutes, but it's a big one. This question is, apart from the misinformation war, are there other major geopolitical concerns that arise from increased AI applications? Who wants to respond to that?
I mean, you could bring in all the things that kind of have an international sphere, like human rights abuses in the supply chain, like bias and discrimination, like the lack of inclusion for the global south. But also I would say that there's a lot of geopolitical posturing going on, which we've seen with the UK government desperate to be the first to have a safety summit around AI, which they held in November last year. And the UK is not a leader in creating this technology that really firmly resides in the US and China, but they were really keen to get in on another, and are actually very good at the ethical dimensions, but they're not even leading in the regulation race, because the regulation race is being won by the EU. So you can see all these countries starting to say, well, how can I be a voice in this? And currently they're all focusing and clustering around the tech companies and taking this very pro-innovation approach, which translates to, we want to please the tech companies because we know that's where the money is. So I think there's huge geopolitical factors in that as well.
Yeah, just to follow up, I mean, also that, depending, as Kate has pointed out, I mean, it makes huge difference where these companies are being kind of based, or what the idea is behind. And, some days ago, I had on LinkedIn one of the European commissioners pointing out, I mean, kind of saying, like, was it democracy protection 1, and then against 0, lobbying and, big tech companies. And so there is always this kind of an idea, it's not only from a legal perspective, it's not only the competition in the field of technology, but it's also competition in the field of regulation of these new technologies. So that's something that's kind of being very, very important. And then, I mean, as Kate pointed out, there is really like a lot of competition in that field.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of related to the issue of misinformation, but I think there is an additional concern, apart from just the generation of huge amounts of misinformation and fake videos. There is the actual possible capacity for these sophisticated large language models, as they become more sophisticated, to use the subtle arts of persuasion in manipulating us to make decisions and to vote in certain ways. So this is not just about information per se, it's about the use of persuasion and manipulation to affect the decisions we make in ways that might undermine our most valued institutions and political systems.
And I imagine that we will need to become much more alert to all the possibilities of conflict by means of information systems, since so much depends upon our systems of finance, for example. It's a very expensive business to try to bomb a city into submission. and it takes a very long time. It doesn't take very long time at all to bring down a finance system. So we perhaps need to be fully aware. Our War Studies department in King's, a very distinguished and very considerable presence in the field, have taught me the slightly sinister phrase attack surface. The fact that we, all of us, use these systems and depend upon them means that we have a very large attack surface, apparently. We have got to draw to a close at this point. I'm so sorry if we haven't got to your question. It isn't because we haven't registered it. Our panelists will have a chance to look at your questions and think about them. And we're very grateful indeed to you all for your questions and for your attendance this evening. I'll now hand back to Jessica Hollifield.
Thank you, Steve. That's excellent. Thank you very much to all of you for so kindly giving up your time for us tonight and speaking to us about something so interesting. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm pleased to share that this has been our biggest King's Expert Series event to date, which is testament to how everyone is finding this topic really interesting and wanting to engage with it and find out more about what King's is doing. I'd also like to thank our audience for joining us and wanting to find out more about our research. I'm going to send an email to you all on Thursday, which will have the recording of this webinar, as well as some more resources, should you wish to take your research further with us. And our final King's Expert Series event of this academic year will be on the 30th of May, and it's going to be all about climate change and sustainability. So do make a note in your diary if you'd like to join us and find our experts going into another one of the big topics of our time. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you all have a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you.